Hello and welcome to Gin with Gwynne. I'm Oliver Gwynne, and this is where I give you my off-the-cuff and unrehearsed thoughts on marketing data and philosophy. This week, I'm talking about risk appetite and how much does it form the part of your success story as you go through your life. And to do so, I'm going to be talking about three very unrelated things that happened to me. One is, I guess, a quote, but one is a calligraphy class, one is somebody applying for a job, and the other is the passing of Pope Francis. Hope he rests in peace. So, three very unrelated things, but they all made me think a lot about risk this week. So, the first thing is the calligraphy class. So, last Sunday, I went to a Chinese calligraphy class at AIDA Shoreditch, and it was taught by my good friend Ling. Now, if you're looking for like a business event that's a bit different, unusual, really relaxing, just focusing on one thing, I really think that calligraphy is different and interesting as that. And if you are a business person that's watching this and you're in London, I really recommend Ling. I've been to a couple of her sessions and I always felt really involved. She always helped. And I always have a really good time. So, hi Ling, if you're watching, and anybody who wants some sort of calligraphy, I recommend her. And her own art is really cool as well. So, I was doing this calligraphy class, and there were a couple of us there, and there were some people who'd not done it before, and they were saying, "Oh, I'm kind of nervous." And I was saying, "Oh, you don't need to be nervous. I've been to this before. Ling's really great." And it's interesting because it made me think, well, they paid to be there at this event. This is a new thing that they're trying. But just by virtue of being new, I think sometimes new things can be very scary. There's a lot of trepidation. I think with calligraphy, it's really focusing your mind on one particular thing, how the strokes are formed and how those strokes form the larger characters that you're going to do. Each stroke requires sort of confidence, but ink is unforgiving. One false move and you're off balance, or you sneeze, or you run out of ink. And I think the same kind of approach is true to how we go through life. Life is like calligraphy, that we're not judged by our drafts, but our willingness to press ink to paper, I'm sure somebody said. So it made me start thinking about our appetite for risk is shaped by how we manage uncertainty, not just logically, but emotionally and behaviorally as well. Recent research from Harvard Business Review shows that 85% of leaders struggle to act decisively in ambiguous situations. Why? Lack of clarity internally and externally. So yeah, clarity, we wish it was always available to us in life, but we all know that that's not necessarily true. So the second story is about somebody who is applying for a job. And this particularly cheeky chap, what he did was, we're hiring at the moment. This guy went onto our website and he booked a meeting with me, and he didn't say anything in his email, or he didn't message me beforehand. He filled in the form to say, we have a form that sort of says what data tools you use, what data sources, what do you want to talk to us about. And then he got in the meeting, and it became quite clear quite quickly that he was looking for a job, and weirdly, not even the job that we had advertised. And, I have mixed feelings on these things. One is, I'm not the person that deals with the hiring, so don't do that. It's not a route to success. I'm not the right person to talk to, and maybe you should check that before you book that meeting. The second thing is, obviously, it's sort of a 50-50 thing. Either I'm going to think, you know what, this guy's got a lot of gumption, he's shown a lot of initiative, that's a good thing, and I do think that. Or I'm just going to be pissed off that this person doesn't respect my time, didn't message me, and just instantly, that's it, no forever. I sort of anticipated that might be the case when I got on the call, that he was looking to do that just because we'd just put up the job advert, and somebody had done that last time we did that. So I wasn't 100% surprised on that. But what was surprising, I think, is here I am, I'm not the right person for that particular job, but I'm certainly involved in the decision making. If I like you, I'm more likely to put you forward. If I met you before, I'll definitely mention this, this kind of thing. And the guy showed up, and he was in a tracksuit. I asked him a bit about himself, and he goes to give me this 5-minute spiel where, if he wasn't reading off ChatGPT, I don't believe that wasn't true at all. He said to me he memorized it when I asked him about it, but I'm pretty sure he had ChatGPT open and he was bing, 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 bing for about 5 minutes of a data engineer does blah, 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 and all this kind of stuff. And so it made me think that, well, here you had an opportunity and you've kind of wasted it because you should be dressed smart. You should be apologetic. Hey, I'm really sorry. I'm actually being a bit cheeky. Can I just take 2 minutes of your time, just tell you a bit about myself? Would you look at my CV? I think if he'd come on and done that, I would have gone away and thought, you know what? He had a nice attitude. If he was suitable, I would have said, you know what? Give this guy a go. He's shown some initiative there. But that wasn't the case. I did offer to look at his CV and he didn't send it to me since. So I think his cheekiness did not pay off because he ultimately could not deliver. He had the opportunity and he sort of wasted it. This made me think a couple of things. So the first is, I think for a lot of business owners, one thing that we don't want to admit is that often we are not ready for certain opportunities that we believe we are. I think all of us would like to believe that tomorrow Apple or Google or somebody big could knock on our door and that we could provide them with services, that we could go to some of these global enterprise level brands. And for a lot of businesses, that is not true. We do not have the processes in place. We don't have the personnel in place. If we were to get such a big commission, it would cause a lot of stress and anxiety, and probably other parts of our businesses would suffer. And often, as much as we might dream about those kind of big clients coming in or big commissions, I'm mostly thinking of B2B here, we're not really ready. And I guess the same is true for a lot of small businesses. They dream that one day thousands of people will order from them, but when it actually happens, they don't have the capacity and they don't have the standards to put it in place, and it takes time to get there. A lot of business people don't really want to admit that this is true of them. If you put a gun to their head and said, well, actually, can you handle that if it comes in? Most of us would really struggle, or there would have to be some, toing and froing behind the scenes to get to that stage. And so there's always a risk involved when we say yes and when opportunities are created. And how much risk do we take on by saying yes to jobs depends on our own sort of personal background. I think I've shared the story before that one of my very first clients came to me and he said, Oliver, I really like the CGI that you've done in this particular video. Can you do some CGI for me? And I said yes. But the CGI that was in that video was a stock footage element. And so I set about over the weekends and evening learning Blender and Maya and all of these kind of things so I could deliver what I'd sort of promised. That's really risky, It didn't really matter at the time. We were brand new and no reputation at stake. But, a lot of businesses have been in place for a long time and they take that risk and it hurts them, especially in the days of LinkedIn when people share things more willingly about bad experiences that they've had. I wanted to share a little bit of stats that I found about overstepping for jobs. So according to LinkedIn, 70% of jobs are never advertised. People are forced to be creative or cheeky to accept them. And one of my favorite philosophers, Kierkegaard, said, to dare is to lose one's footing momentarily. Not to dare is to lose oneself. So I guess you will be the judge of whether this person was reckless or just willing to take a risk. At the end of the day, I guess he had nothing to lose if I rejected him. Other than, I suppose, in the future, if he wanted to, if a year passed, maybe I'd definitely reject him again, based on him, if I take an angle to that. Coming back to this calligraphy thing. So yeah, at the start of the lesson, and I remember this was true of myself, the first time I did the Chinese calligraphy, people were kind of scared about doing it wrong. And the end of our lesson is to put pen to paper on, or brush to paper, I guess, on a bookmark. And, I didn't do a great job on the bookmark. My practice ones were probably better than that. But nothing's ever perfect. And I think too often the pursuit of perfection or getting everything right can cost us. And so we're less likely to take risks that we really need to. A study by the American Psychological Association links perfectionism to elevated stress, anxiety, and decreased career satisfaction. I think we all know that stress is not good to us, and that perfectionism, putting pressure on our own shoulders, will only lead to unhappiness. Sometimes we have to be forgiving of our own self. And if we wait too long for everything to be perfect, for the stars to align, we'll never actually take opportunities when they come. Marcus Aurelius reminds us that if it's not right to do, do not do it. If it's not true, do not say it. But what if we don't even start for fear of doing it wrong? Who knows where our lives would be? And I think we all know people in life that play it safe, perhaps too safe. They don't take risks. They don't challenge themselves. They don't seize opportunities when opportunities don't come to them the perfect way. They're not willing to go sideways or backwards. They get comfortable, and so they end up in comfortable places. Now, there's points in life where I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I don't think there's anything wrong with comfortability and contentment at all. I think that's what we're all seeking. But I think to take risks is to do something that makes us uncomfortable, and to grow is often an uncomfortable experience that we all have to go through in order to learn and in order to better ourselves. And so, coming on to the late Pope Francis, there's a great program. I'm not a religious person, but there's a great program where they had a group of students, I believe, and they interviewed the Pope. It's called The Pope Speaks. It's on Disney Plus, and I found myself intrigued by this some months ago before he's passing away. And I watched it. It was quite good. Obviously, the Pope is used to these kind of questions, these seemingly hard questions. I'm sure he's quite used to them, but he gives some very good answers. And one of the things that he said in the program that really stuck with me was something along the lines that in life, what we need is continuity between our head, our hearts, and our actions. And I think sometimes if we don't have those things, then our output becomes distorted, our actions seem sort of reckless, or they can be overly cautious because there's not a clear alignment. We're not sure what decision to make because our head tells us, hey, this is risky. Our heart says, hey, this is what I want. And our actions are somewhere in the middle. I think that the best risk takers are not impulsive people. They are people who have a good integration, a good continuity between the head, logic, the heart, which is their values, and their hand, actions in sync. Confucius wrote that the superior man is modest in his speech, but exceeds in his actions. Too many of us are guilty of talking about what we want and never actually getting in there. So coming back to this idea of risk attitude, is it something that's born or is it something that's built? I have a friend who, like myself, is a northerner, and we're both down in London, and we were talking about drama. He was saying that somebody in his family is sort of pregnant, but they're still living at home and they've been sponging, and now they're in this kind of stressful situation. And he was asking the question of, does drama sort of attract yourself if you're poor, if you've not got the emotional intelligence? And I said, I think it's actually sort of to do with risk in a weird way. I think that if you are quite rich, that you kind of seek out drama because you want something interesting in your life. Your life is not particularly risky in many aspects, but you're more willing to take a risk in terms of career ambitions, in terms of starting a company, because you have that sort of safety net. So in some areas of life where you've not got a safety net, maybe you're a bit more risky in those elements if you've got sort of money, but there's less risk, and that there's less risk when you've got money in the family. That's the reason why a lot of politicians come from rich families, because they can devote the time to it. They got the money to do flyers and all that kind of thing. And if it comes to nothing, it doesn't really matter as much. So Kahneman and Tversky, I feel like some people watch just to see me butcher names. Kahneman and Tversky's prospect theory shows that people are twice as likely to avoid loss than to seek gain. There's an interesting psychological test where people are given a bridge with one brick missing, and most people will add another brick in order to make the bridge full instead of, which is equally valid, taking a brick away, because adding a brick shows growth. It's a positive move. Even if presented that taking a brick away would cost less, they're more likely to add a brick. I don't think anybody is a natural daredevil. I don't think that anybody is born to sort of take risks or because they've got a certain family background that's inherent in them. Risk appetite can be trained through exposure therapy. If you're afraid of spiders and you gradually expose yourself to spiders, you become less afraid. Through habit formation, if you're afraid of public speaking and you slowly build it up over time, you'll become less afraid and you'll be more willing to take that risk. But perhaps the number one thing is that you need a supportive environment in order to reshape your own attitude. Because I think in life, nothing is as risky as we seem in our minds. Few things really carry a huge risk or have a social impact that we imagine. I'm always reminded of two old men in the pub that go and chat up a young lady. There's no risk to them. They have no expectation that the young lady will go home with them. The worst that can happen is that they spend some money on a drink and the lady then sort of says thank you and ignores them. That's the worst that can happen, or that she rejects them. But who cares? They expect the rejection. But the truth is that we're all those old men in a way. There is no risk to any of us going and chatting somebody up in a bar, really. The only risk is in our own mind and to our own egos. And if you can overcome that, then you can go further. So those have been my ramblings this week about risk attitude. I think it's a crucial part of anybody's success. I think founders and entrepreneurs are just generally less risk averse than the rest of us. But it is a trait that can be trained over time, as long as you are taking calculated risks and not silly ones. This has been my thoughts of the week, and let me know your attitude to risk in the comments below. Thank you very much for watching.